Good morning. If everybody will please take their seats and turn off any cell phones. I am Laurie Wheel. On behalf of Henrietta's daughter, Mooney Figueres, I am honored to welcome you to this ceremony of remembrance and celebration of our beloved Henrietta. Thank you, Mooney, for entrusting us with the opportunity to honor your mother, for sharing her with us with your wide, warm embrace that we feel from you across time and across the miles. There are many people who contributed to today's program and the ability to hold it here and virtually everywhere. We thank the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts and its executive director, Angie Dodson, and its special events coordinator, Erin Gainey. For everything that is neither place nor technical, we thank Deborah Wright and Karki Tackett, Henrietta's friends, executive assistant, and neighbor, for coordinating today's ceremony and for knowing and advising best next steps. We appreciate the technical genius and patience of Rick Martin with AVR, who has made it possible for family and friends from all over the nation and the world to be with us right now in real time. Following the ceremony, the video will be available on YouTube. Thank you to the people who will share their Henrietta memories with us. Anita Kern and Tarki Tackett are here with us, and Alex Papachristou, Judge Myron Thompson, and Ann Odom and Mooney will come to us through the air of this magnificent day. We are grateful to have Michael Zizak and his musical gifts with us. Michael, who is here through the generosity of Dr. Michelle Goodwin, is the cello fellow with the Montgomery Symphony Orchestra. Midway through our guest remembrances, Michael will offer a musical interlude when each of us can be with our thoughts and memories of our Queen and First Lady, Henrietta. First, however, Henrietta will speak to us in her inimitable fashion with her peerless flair that first drew us, then kept us voluntarily bound to her.
There is no silver bullet to resolve your problems. You just pursue what is for you of value with the hope that you will never give up, never let go. Keep struggling towards whatever you think is of value. Maybe accepting the idea that satisfaction comes in the struggle itself rather than achieving it. It's like the journey is half the fun. And so that perhaps is the way to satisfaction for some of us. Maybe that's the best that you can hope for. I was so shy and so afraid and so uncertain that learning another language, which you have to do, was always so difficult for me. I remember on one occasion when I used a word in Spanish which I had heard. The word is hedionda, which means smelling bad. And I said that to a lady. Later, she came around in tears almost to my aunt, and so my aunt came to me, and we had this great controversy, my using a word which I didn't understand, and it just offended the whole community. It's uphill work, and it's so embarrassing. You're constantly making idiotic mistakes. But little by little, even shy people finally reach a stage where they can finally confront someone and say, "Oh, good morning," without turning bright red. The only way to live is to live every single second as though it's going to be the very last one. And so every time life presents you with any kind of opportunity to do anything, move into it. And so my advice is always go.
Anyone who didn't know Henrietta personally, but might read Henrietta's fascinating book, Married to a Legend, Don Pepe, or see Andrea Callen's spellbinding documentary, First Lady of the Revolution, or read any of the hundreds of articles Henrietta wrote for the magazine she started and the ones that followed, would be wowed by her extraordinary accomplishments over a 102-year lifetime, uniquely, excellently well-lived. Anyone who might see this treasure of a video, Pearls of Wisdom, would see her knockout glamorous beauty that age uncommonly did not alter. From all these sources, they would learn that Henrietta was always surrounded by adoring family and friends, but they might not understand her essence that remains with us always. Now, as I speak about my relationship with Henrietta and use the personal pronoun I want you to know that I am aware that I applies to you as well. I marveled at a person so calm and comfortable in her own skin that she was able to be passionate about racial injustice, worried and resolute that Doug Jones, Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris win this upcoming election, and be loyal to her friends, whatever their political views. She said politics should never come between friends. We need about 330 million Henriettas right now. Henrietta never got too old to be a student. She read voraciously, including a French newspaper every night to remain fluent in French. Whether as a journalist or friend, she asked big questions, then listened carefully with such kindness and altogether without judgment that I was ready to tell her everything. I knew I mattered to Henrietta. When I was with Henrietta, she wanted to know what I thought about the widest range of topics, public and personal. Henrietta treated me as though I were the most important, interesting person in the room, when actually she was. But Henrietta was not interested in the spotlight. She much preferred to shine light on causes, organizations, and people who provided opportunities as she had done, especially to young people and women. Henrietta was an ideas person, an idealist, and to all of us who knew her, ideal. Whenever I left Henrietta's company, it was with a heart made light with the laughter her company assured us. She and I, whether on the phone or in person, always engaged in wordplay, and most often about men, whom she both loved and enchanted. She referred to my husband, Tommy Wool, as, quote, you know whom. When we spoke or visited, she would tell me to give her undying love to you know whom. And if I planned to leave town without him, she would say that my time away afforded her the chance to be with you know whom. And I would say he was counting on that, which gave way to her contagious, delighted ripples of laughter. Henrietta was in love with life, in love with us. She was so complete and wise that she brought out the best in us. That was her essence, and that is what remains forever with us. Let her memory and her essence be an inspiration for all of us to see life and each other with such light, lightness, and love.
Hi, I'm Anita Kern, and I have a few remembrances. I met Henrietta in the 1990s. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Pat Patillo, and Pat called me up one day and said, "Can you come out on Thursday to the farm?" He kept Pasafinos, the little horses you see so much in Costa Rica. He says, "I have some friends out, and we're going to be riding, and thought you should meet some of them." And I, of course, never turned down such an offer, and went out to the farm, and we rode the Pasafinos, and that's when I met Henrietta and Mavi. It was wonderful. You know, Henrietta was, she liked incongruous things, and I think she found me a little that way. She said, I'm from Alabama, small town in the northeast corner, Scottsboro, and I had gone to Atlanta to study physics and astronomy, and worked at a science center and museum, observatory there. But also my family was in retail dry goods, so I also took time off to go on buying trips to New York and other places. And it was not long after that first meeting, a few months, that Henrietta called and said she would like to come over, and Hale-Bopp the comet was making an appearance. She'd like to come see the comet and maybe talk to me and, you know, visit for a while. So she came over and stayed with me. Hale-Bopp was up about 3 a.m. at that time, but we went out to the observatory and had dinner. You know, she was fond of well, I'll tell you some of the other things. But anyway, she came out to look at the comet. Well, the comet wasn't visible from my back deck. It was visible, had to go kind of to the front yard. And I did get her up at 3 in the morning. And she, you know, in her lovely silk nightgown and robe and a heavy coat and her little slippers, we went out in the front yard and, well, really in the middle of the street. And as we stood in the middle of the street and pointed to the comet, which was visible to the naked eye, but also we had our binoculars, we stood out there and discussed comets for about 15 or 20 minutes. I was just grateful the police didn't come by. And then went back in. Not long after that, she said, "Well, you know, when are you going to New York on that buying trip?" And so I think she went up to, I told her, and she went up to see Alex and visit with his family, but joined me as I went around with my cousin to showroom after showroom after showroom, buying ladies' dresses and sportswear. It was incongruous. But anyway, after that, she said these were interviews, and she was going to write an article. And so I appeared in Montgomery Living magazine shortly after that. It was a great article, but as one of Henrietta's quips that many of you will remember, she was never constrained by the truth. We became fast friends. She would call up and say, "Lemmy, this is the scourge of the Pampas." I said, "I'm going to be the scourgette in training." She was so much fun, and we traveled a lot together. She would come over to Atlanta, I would come to Montgomery. One time, I had to go on a business trip to Vienna and to scout an exhibit and IMAX film premiere for the museum that we were interested in. And my dad was going to go with me, but at the last minute, he couldn't go. So he said, "Well, you know, use my ticket, take a friend." Literally on Sunday night, I called Henrietta. I said, "I've got to go to Vienna on business on Tuesday. I've got an extra ticket. You want to go?" "Yeah." "And I'll be there tomorrow. I'll be at your house tomorrow." And that was great. And we had a wonderful time. She also went with Steve Scott back here, similarly to Honduras, to talk to all the ministers of culture about a museum they were working on. She was very adventurous. Favorite thing that, as I recall, she would come over to Atlanta, and she would often say, I want to sit on your deck and, you know, in the morning drink coffee and discuss life in the raw. Never quite sure what that meant, but we certainly had great discussions. I would come to Montgomery, go to the theater with her during the season, and she would say, "Well, come over to Montgomery, we'll have a drunken debauch." Now, those of you know Henrietta, she drank about that much white wine in the bottom of a glass, and she carried the same glass all evening. But those were two of her quips that I remember well. My husband and I were married about 10 years ago in Antigua, Guatemala. She was our matron of honor. And we had a wonderful time on that trip. But when we got back, about a week later, this huge delivery guy with a huge bag of rose petals arrived at Carl's office and strewn the petals all over the office. The note was signed, "A Secret Admirer." And as has been mentioned, all the men were certainly in love with Henrietta. She was. I remember our conversations. That's the main thing that touches. I'll never forget. But one of the things her conversations were always never about people and things. They were about ideas. But one of the things I remember most was her phrases was the one where she said, "You only regret the things you did not do." And I certainly think that's true, and I know she's up there wishing she'd voted absentee. One time after a trip to Atlanta, and I'll close with this, she was headed back to Montgomery. She had been there. Everybody was fascinated by her, as always. And my husband and another girlfriend's husband, we were sitting on our deck, getting toward twilight, looking at the roses, and they were both husbands professing their undying love for Henrietta. And David and Beth, David said, I feel a poem coming on. And kind of looked at him. This was not his day job. And he said, out came a poem. And so I rapidly went in and wrote it down. And so I'll close with a poem by David Martin for Henrietta. I feel the thorn, I feel its sting. 'Tis love's unyielding claim. But I will listen every night as the rose calls out your name.
Hello, Henrietta. How I miss saying that. The way we started so many conversations these past months. How I miss her laugh. She had several. The genteel guffaw, the salacious giggle, all she allowed herself when hearing something particularly juicy. We met in the parking lot of a Baptist church in East Montgomery. And if that weren't enough, when we approached, she pulled from behind her back an apple to present to me. And thus began my descent to the world of Henrietta. Of course, an ascent. We went to her A-frame house, which I was thinking of renting. That landlord-tenant relationship didn't work out. The house wasn't as well preserved as she, to put it mildly. But we developed a teacher-student relationship. She was to teach me Spanish. We met once a week for lunch, and of course, didn't really speak much Spanish. All I learned was a sus pies, at your feet, which is what she insisted that I say. She was my teacher of the South, of the traditions and the troubles of that place that was hers. And then she became my teacher of South America. We went a couple of years later together to Costa Rica, where I met Muni and her brother and their father, Don Pepe, who at that point was really just a shadow next to the glowing sunshine of Henrietta. We traveled to her cabin on the edge of the volcano to work on a screenplay of her life, hammering it out on an old typewriter, huddled by a sputtering fire, eating cold tamales that her daughter-in-law had prepared. That screenplay, of course, became the film, Married to a Legend, but I don't deserve or take any credit for that film. We just had a lot of fun working on that screenplay. And that was the first of many trips. We traveled a second time to Costa Rica later. We were in Paris together for the wedding of Diala. lots of strange looks from guests who didn't know who this couple was. Not likely the same generation, but clearly quite attached. We traveled later to Chile to visit Diala, and together with her and her husband went to Buenos Aires and saw a tango performance. And of course, Henrietta visited in New York and in Massachusetts, where I am now, sending my greetings to all of you. Over the years, of course, it became difficult to keep up with her and to get near to her as her circle of admirers grew. As I returned to Montgomery, I had to elbow my way past Morris Dees, Brian Stevenson, and of course, Win Falk. The person I could never quite push aside, whom she admired most of all, of course, was one of my great heroes, Judge Thompson. He, for her, was the best of the South and someone she really held so dear. I did manage to weasel my way into her affections later with my daughter Lucy, who moved to Montgomery and lived for several months there and became the closest of friends with Henrietta. And that was a wonderful relationship for her, for Lucy, and for me. So I'm so glad that we've had all of these great times together and that you and I can share them with each other. So my very best to all of you, and we raise our glasses and get sus pies to Henrietta. Thank you. Bye.
Thompson, and I'm joined here by my wife, Ann Oldham.
Good morning.
good morning to Mooney and Mavi and the rest of your family, and to the many friends who are at the museum, as well as seeing this by, I guess you say seeing it virtually. I just remembered that it was 40 years ago this month that Ann and I first saw or met Henrietta. Do you remember that, Ann?
Yes, we were invited to her house, right?
Right.
Where the Japanese garden was that we never saw.
That's true too.
Yeah.
And I think we were both struck by her beauty and brilliance. I called them the two B's that Henrietta had. Second only to you, Ann, of course.
Thank you. There's a story about that. She used to always comment on your physique. And
My physique?
Yes,
Okay, go
and
ahead.
so I always called you her boyfriend. After a while, I said you were her boyfriend because she would compliment you in front of me, especially. And so I wondered if, this relationship was a little different than I saw, and then I realized, and then I said I figured, well, what was probably going to happen was she talked about when you would become a widower.
Oh, I haven't heard this one
Yeah,
before.
you were going to become a widower.
Oh, my goodness.
And I guess you all were going to knock me off and ride off into the sunset. So
This is a first one for me. But anyway,
he's being modest.
pardon me?
He's being modest. Go ahead.
No, well, actually, I think the real hero in all this is you, Ann, because you had to live with me after she said all that.
Yeah, I know. Did have a big head.
Yes, thank you. But anyway, I did consider her, as I said, this combination of beauty and brilliance, and I called her Her Highness. And when I would call her on the phone or go over to her house, I would say that Her Highness had summoned me, and I said, "What are my instructions?" And she would smile. She never complained about my calling her that, but she was just such an incredibly gracious, charming person. But Ann, I think you actually got to know her in another light.
Well, I don't know if it was in another light. It probably was, but I just remember when we started to have children. She wasn't particularly fond of being around us then very much. I guess we talked a lot about them, and she just said,
Yeah, she was pretty open when you talked about your kids. Too much, yes.
She didn't care for that, but and to say that, she said, children. But anyway, in spite of that, she really did she did spend time with children. They were older, and she did really get involved. I remember she got involved with one of our friends and one of her friends' children, two of them in fact, and encouraged one to learn to speak Spanish. She took the other one on a wonderful trip to either South America or
Africa. I think it was to Africa, actually. Yes.
Yeah, and the child that she took, or the young woman that she took pictures, and they made a book together. And in addition to that, she was really nice to our kid Jalen, to our son,
Yes.
in getting him connected with the Cloverdale Playhouse for a brief time, just for him to get his feet wet into something different. And there was one more thing, and that was about Caroline Lawson's group of women who were mentoring senior girls at Lanier High School. And I believe that Henrietta was very much involved in that, and they were teaching young women to write. And the mentors were people like Henrietta, who were forming a relationship with those young ladies and encouraging them to learn to write and being models for them. So
Yeah. Well, there is no question that that Henrietta was deeply involved in our community, and I guess for us personally, though, is that she became such truly a dear friend. There's a big gap for us right now.
Yes.
But I want to tell one other little story about Henrietta. She went up to Yale with me to receive an award, and I asked her, I said, Henrietta, would you mind accompanying me? She was 100 years old at the time. And so I walked into the room, and it suddenly dawned on me, as everyone gravitated towards Henrietta, and she was her usual beautiful, brilliant, charming self, that I had accompanied her. And I think everyone in this crowd would agree that Henrietta accompanies no one. You always accompany her. She just shines like a star. She shines like the sun. Mm-hmm. And just a glorious, glorious woman. And just the number of times we had her over to our house for dinner, and of course, the number of times we went over to her house for dinner, and it was just a splendid, splendid 40 years.
Yes,
Yeah.
and she was always a treat for your law clerks.
Oh, yes.
I mean, meeting her was a necessary part of the experience here.
And in fact, I think some of the law clerks, when they came back to see her, and incidentally came back to see me.
Yeah.
That
one particular
his name will go unmentioned.
We will not mention his name.
Right. Well, I see our time is up. It's 6 minutes, and I don't want to hog the show. I know there are a lot of people who want to say wonderful things, and there's so many wonderful things to say about Henrietta. But to Henrietta's family and to all her friends, we all share just incredible memories, and we all share a great loss.
We certainly do.
Yes. And thank you for allowing Anne and me to...
it was a privilege.
Yes.
It's a privilege.
To speak today. It's very humbling.
We will miss her.
We will miss her. Thank you.
My name is Karki Tackett, and 6 years ago, I moved into the house next door to Henrietta. I had no idea who she was. Immediately, she invited me to a picnic, and before long, she was calling me Sweetie Pie, which I love. We started walking just about every day, and that began 6 years of long, wonderful walks. Early on, I realized I had a new best friend. Later on, I found out there were others. We were all her best friends. In the hospital once, Henrietta marveled at all the gifts and cards and flowers she'd gotten, and that was when Jean Townsend, one of her favorite artists, shrugged and told her, "They are your rats." And Henrietta said, I beg your pardon? Jean said, "You are the Pied Piper. We are your rats." Henrietta didn't tell me about any of it at first, but eventually I learned and read about her time as a guerrera, revolutionary, first lady, activist, writer, traveler, etc. I didn't know her during those years, but it was my good fortune to know her during what would be the last 6 years of her life. I knew her as a doting mother and grandmother and as a loving, faithful friend. She was a masterful flirt. She flirted with every man here, and also with the security guard at the Methodist Church, the director of the YMCA, every doctor she ever went to, and every waiter who ever served her. She was shameless, and she was good. Somebody told me recently that sometimes fate can deal you a better hand than you can deal yourself. That's been true for me. I could never have dreamed her up. She loved her sprawling, fascinating family and what she claimed were her hundreds of granddaughters. Her love for her friends was apparent. She quoted them, treasured their gifts and invitations, and kept a steady stream of people scheduled to come for drinks, dinner, plays, parties. I loved her stories about Virginia Durr, Scotty Fitzgerald, and the group of politically active friends who, with high grandeur, called themselves the women of the world. Her compliments were extravagant. "Sweetie pie, you have made the best carrots in the Western world." Or this on my voicemail: "Sweetie pie, I want you to know that when the history of the 21st century is written, this peach cobbler will go down as an accomplishment like that of the first man on the moon." Her language was colorful and unpredictable. She called children either horrid beasts or poor little choop choop. She said that some people ought to be strangled, and often observed, "Life plays these tricks on us." She would invite me to come over to discuss life in the raw. And if I complimented her on something, she would give the mock humble response, "For me is nothing." When she was born, women in the U.S. did not have the right to vote or hold office. She was aware of that, and when given a chance, she insisted that women's suffrage be included in Costa Rican law. Imagine how that's celebrated today in Costa Rica. Fittingly, she lived long enough to see the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment to our Constitution. She believed in listening to the voices of women. Henrietta said the secret of successful aging is to have friends who are younger than you. Considering her birth year and the number of people here today who are under 102, she obviously got that done. She was a convener and generously introduced her new friends to the older ones. You wanted to sit beside her at a party. She had no patience for superficial or dull talk. She was never dull. She often said one should never be limited by the truth. I wouldn't call her a liar, but she's been caught in some whoppers. Her time as a guide on old home tours in Montgomery left us with a vast trove of stories about the priceless belongings now in private homes here that came from Russian czars, nuclear physicists, and well-known actors who must remain nameless. She was a writer and teller of tales, and I know of at least 2 recent gatherings devoted to sharing Henrietta stories. I even heard a new story this week about how she once invited friends to the best restaurant in town for French fries and dessert. We'll be telling Henrietta stories for a long time. They'll be light and quirky, and with time, the stories will gain details and get better and better, as she would have wanted. There's a famous quote about Rome: "Non basta una vita." A lifetime is not enough. Even Henrietta's extraordinary lifetime was not enough. We all wanted more. So when we tell her stories, we will have more.
Good morning, everyone. Or, as Mama would have said, yoo-hoo. I wish I could be with you today, though you are on my mind and have been since last September 9th. Well, at least we're all somehow gathered in this beautiful setting, so beloved of Doña Henrietta, thanks to the courtesy of the Museum of Fine Arts of Montgomery and to its director, Angie Dodson, to the work of its special events coordinator, Aaron Gainey, and most importantly, to the generosity of its trustee and our host today, Laurie Wheel. It is heartwarming for me to witness the love of this community for Doña Henrietta, and I thank all of you for your embrace, your abrazo. Your goodness and love have comforted her over many, many years. She delighted in her friendship with you, and though she was an adventurous traveler, she never would have left Montgomery. And as she once told me, I cannot leave my friends. Well, now our queen is dead. She is gone. True to form, she left quietly, quickly, and without our permission, looking beautiful and smiling. Typical, isn't it? Unlike many victims of this cursed plague, which has hit so hard on so many people's lives, unimaginable damage to so many people around the world and in the States and in Alabama. Mama left this world from her lovely home, peacefully surrounded by a lucky few of us, and we are extremely grateful for that. As you know, she was a woman of words. She was a writer and an editor, and a master at both skills. In fact, she did opine that just about everything written was too long, and every story was too wordy. In her considered opinion, in fact, most of Shakespeare's plays needed editing. Not to speak, of course, of the Bible, which she knew and loved well from her Presbyterian upbringing. But she did find that there were, too many begats marking the passage of countless generations, and too much machismo, actually, which would have had to be, deleted and rewritten. In fact, she may well be discussing this matter with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, even as we speak here today. Now, if it turns out that God is a woman, as Mama used to assert with full authority, I do not envy our Holy Mother up there, stuck between Ruth and Henrietta. Do you? Well, editing was central to her mindset and to her lifestyle. She selected her words and she selected her friends carefully. Many of them among you are here today. She nurtured her friends generously. She stuck to her loyalties and to her opinions firmly. In fact, given this unrelenting reliability, you should think that she would have been a nerd. Well, the trouble is that she was structurally fanciful and theatrical and seductive through her capacity to endlessly surprise us. And with this lightness of being, which was her personal music, we all fell in love and in the trap of her charm. And yes, she was a romantic. And yes, she was most probably in love to her last day. Was she smiling that day that she left us? Because she would see her son, Martí, who had died exactly a year ago today? We don't know. Was she smiling because she had an engagement? Perhaps a moonlight tryst unbeknown to us. To be sure, had we imprudently asked her, she would have answered that she was not emotionally prepared to discuss it. Well, as we saw just now in the video of her pearls of wisdom, she does say that the fun of life is not necessarily in getting where you want to go, but rather in the struggle itself. Since each of you was important to her, and I see her in each of you, what do you say to a collective pledge that we all seek to preserve in each of us her special touch? I, for one, will undertake that struggle, and I do think it would be fun if all the rest of us did it, whether together or individually. Yes, our queen is gone. Her ashes spread in Montreat, North Carolina, the Boggs' family retreat, where her Figueres and her MacGuire descendants try to gather every year. But she's not really gone. Not really, is she? Because to all of us, as the psalm says, she was our shepherdess. And she will live through all of us here forever. And with her memory in our hearts, we know that we shall not want. So, in the spirit of her elegance and grace, su elegancia y su gracia, as we say in her other country, Costa Rica, I thank you all for your love for her. Our queen is gone, but not really. Within each of us who knew her, she will live on.
Is concluded. Please feel free to enjoy the sculpture garden, and the galleries are open now in the museum that Henrietta loved so much. Thank you all for being here.